Today we're gonna see a Columbus PD officer. When it came time for business, he had his business socks on. Hi everyone, welcome to today's badge cam lesson here at Active Self Protection. I'm your host, John Correa.
And I'm your co-host, Mike Williver. Today's video comes to us from Columbus, Ohio.
Today's video is brought to us by Mantis. The Mantis family of products is integral to ASP staff building handgun and carbine skills and are your most economical and fastest path to improvement in your skills too. Whether you choose the X10, the Laser Academy, the Blackbeard, or use them all in concert, they will help your practice be more effective, efficient, and fun. Go check them out, pick up a unit, and thank them for sponsoring today's video. Columbus PD officers here, you can see it is 2:30 in the morning and they are on routine patrol. This area is known, it's a bar area, right? It's a nightlife area. And so it's got a pretty good police presence. Cops are just kind of, moseying about. They're gonna come across a pretty big dispute, a disturbance here. Now in this neighborhood, in this bar district, they already had a shooting earlier this evening. So cops are a little bit amped up because of the shooting earlier. They're about to run into a group of people that have umbrage with each other. Let's see how they handled it.
That's what I've been telling these motherfuckers. Don't go that way. Somebody just got shot. Stop.
Alright, I'm not fighting.
Somebody just got shot right down there.
I'm not fighting.
I don't want any more fights. Stop.
Right here.
Right down the block. Somebody got
Right
shot.
here.
Be careful that way. Somebody just got shot.
Come down here.
Stop.
Come down here. Come down here.
Stop fighting. I'd go another way. I'd go around.
Copy 621 high with the victim. Copy left 4 high, another victim.
Stop.
Look here, over here. That's good. Over here.
I just told you to stop.
That's the cops, baby. That's the cops.
How many cops do we have? Hey, look. Roll red. Man, football that.
Please let me get to her. 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 I'm not winning.
Hey, you're gonna get maced. Stop. 9041 is a new piece in cars from Zone 5 to Iron first if you don't mind, please.
I wasn't fighting, so
I got behind me. 48, 48 copy.
We need some mason, we need some more officers for the inspection teams.
After blessing that one lady with the hot sauce, they go about their business a little bit, cooling off everyone else. I've sped it up simply for the sake of time. You can go watch the original if you want. I've linked it in the description. things are going to get a little crazy in a minute here. Not with this group, but all of a sudden things are going to get a little south right across the street. Let's watch what happens.
Stay with them. Yeah. These are the ones that won't stop fighting. So if you just want to look at us,
Second shooter, ice on that line. If they're still coming in.
get on the ground! Get on the ground! Do not move! Do not move! Stop! 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 Stop!
Copy,
Drop the gun! 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 Don't move! Do not move! Do not move! Do not move! Kick that gun away! Kick that gun away! Don't move! Do not move! Stop! Get down, ground! Stay down!
we need cars at 849 miles. You got 2 shots. 849 north, I have 2 shots. Yeah, go ahead.
847, we need another medic. Shots fired, 33 recovered. We need cars, please.
Copy, 847 north, high shots fired. 33 recovered.
The last update that I have on this is one of 2 shootings that they had that night, is that a grand total of 10 people were shot in those 2 shootings. All 10 are expected to survive. Of course, there were a host of charges here. I don't think the girl that got OC sprayed, I don't think she faced any charge, or at least it didn't make the news story that she did. It wasn't newsworthy. No officers were harmed in this, and that dude who they ended up putting in cuffs, they got him the help that he needed. And again, he's expected to survive and probably face a bunch of charges. All right, hands up. Who got the dated pop culture reference of the business socks? Mike, I make no bones about the fact that going to the bar at 2:30 in the morning is violating all of the rules of stupid, and I don't do it personally. And I know some people who really like the nightlife, they like to boogie and all that stuff, and okay, fine, whatever. But you gotta recognize you're violating a lot of rules of stupid when you do that.
Yeah, and that's the first disco reference that I've heard you make on the channel, but I don't know if it's the first one of all time. First one of our badge cams, so I'm impressed. Listen, a lot of things are going on here. The cops have a lot to deal with. They're dealing with drunk people, and drunk people are irrational, and they talk too much, and they can't be reasoned with, and they like to fight, and they get their feelings hurt very easily. And the problem is you don't want to arrest every drunk who's doing the slightest thing wrong because, as you said, John, there was already a shooting in this area that night, which means if they arrest everyone who's doing the slightest little thing, they have far fewer officers to be out there on the street. So we're going to let little infractions go, maybe with a warning. But this sort of thing, it's the worst duty of all time. This is the stuff for like 23, 24-year-old cops with a 45-year-old supervisor because it sucks and it's only something a young cop would want to do.
And I think they did a pretty good job of trying to calm this woman down. Like, you know, she's freaking out and all that stuff. Hey, listen, as the private citizens here, maybe you got into a kerfuffle. Remember, the de-escalation, escape, and evasion, really good thing. Now, I know some folks are going to wonder about the officer blessing this woman with some hot sauce here, okay? So he hits her with the OC. I actually love it. I think that in this case, this woman here, highly agitated, angry, trying to get away from everybody, talking about how she's going to get after these other people, and, you know, she wants to fight. And so if I just hit her with the hot sauce here, when it's imminent, when I'm like, yeah, she's going to start a fight here in the next minute or so, then I can take the starch right out of her jammies. In 5 minutes or so, we can decon her, and it's like an adult spanking. I'm not kidding you, man. It hurts like heck, but it doesn't injure. So I guess it's not like a spanking because it doesn't injure or any of that stuff. So just it'll change her whole attitude, and then you don't even have to arrest her. I think this was probably a really good thing to do to kind of calm everything down.
A few weeks ago, we're butt checking people, and now we're doing adult spankings, John. I don't like the direction this channel is going in. So here's the deal. This is why OC spray is such a fantastic, less lethal tool. It can be used on someone who is just about to assault someone. Now, look, you can't use it because you think a thing or whatever. She's already been uncooperative. You've got all these people around in every direction. You don't have time to mess with her all night long. You got to get her contained and isolated and stopped so that you can get her into custody and get her out of there. And hopefully she can stop egging everyone else on to continue the fight, and it ends up being an entire melee. I think the OC spray was absolutely the correct thing to do, and it works fantastically. You just saw, as you said, took the starch right out of her jammies. Well done all the way around. Great tactic.
And it cleared the whole area too, right? Like, hey, he was using like a fogger there, and that little fog just set up a no-go zone for everyone. And like, oh boy, just for a little minute, it's outdoors, right? You know, the wind will blow it away relatively quickly, but it got everybody to get the heck out of there, and that is an effective means there. Now, the shots ring out. Holy crap. And I want to note a couple things here. Number one, officer has to go from, hey, I'm just kind of cooling everything down, to now lives are at stake and shots are ringing out. And I got to change mindset to deal with that. Number two, I just want to say for these officers, as a private citizen, everybody should be ducking and getting out of the way. You should be running away from the sound of this gunfire, unless you've got a loved one that's right over there. This officer, his response is to turn and run towards the gunfire, get his gun out and engage. That to me, that by itself is admirable. I don't know if it's quite by itself giving you access to the Special Pants Brigade, but dang, it's close, man.
I got to tell you, this ability to shift gears is so critical in law enforcement, in this job. You may have to go from clearing a terrible accident where kids were killed and you saw awful things, and you go 10-8 because it's not your case, somebody else is handling it. And the next thing you have is a neighbor dispute, about the dogs were barking or whatever, or he put his fence and his fence is 3 millimeters onto my property. And that ability to shift and be professional and do your job in all sorts of ways, not just this, is very important. Nobody cares how your day has gone. Nobody cares if you're fighting with your wife. Nobody cares about the last call you're on. You're present in the moment. This guy was extremely present in this moment. As you said, he went from, a bunch of drunks I got to deal with, kind of a ho-hum, a little tense because you never know what's going to happen, to crap, there's a gunfight. And let me tell you, if you haven't heard gunshots in the wild when you're not expecting them, they're louder than you think, and they're terrifying. It's a terrifying sound to hear, especially in rapid succession, gunshots going off. You're not at a range. You're like, what the heck's happening? Well, it's happening. Figure out that it's happening. As Stephanie likes to say, rapidly and radically accept reality and then deal with it. And that's exactly what they did.
And I love them for that, okay? And listen, I think this is one of the things that a police officer needs to do. Run towards the sound of gunfire. Cops, officers, hear me. If you can't, it's time for a new job. Simple as that. And not everybody can. And that's not to say you're not a good person. Now, recognize, shots are ringing out. Couple things here. You got to figure out real fast who the good people and who the bad people are. Secondarily, I do want to note here, very common that what this officer does, he's ripping out shots there at quarter-second splits at targets that are all the way across the diagonal of the intersection and back over by the truck here. You're talking about 20 to 30 yards, and he's running quarter-second splits. Unless you are a USPSA grandmaster, you are not going to get hits at that level. I'm going to tell you, I train with my pistol a lot, and I can't get hits at that speed, at that distance, okay? Not reliably, at the very least. If you're Rob Latham, yes. But for normal humans, very difficult. So officers, hear me. You've got to be committed, especially at longer distances, to shoot at the speed of your competence, not the speed that you feel like you want to put rounds down range. That takes real emotional control. It's difficult to do, but you can do it.
Yeah, 100%. Here's what I would add to that, John. I think if you are an officer and you are out in the street and all of a sudden you have a gunfight going next to you, it's very likely the first time that has happened to you. And so those first few shots that were a little too rapid are probably perfectly natural if you haven't trained for that sort of thing. So I think knowing your incompetence level, your confidence in your equipment is extremely important. Look, if you know a 30-yard shot with your 9mm is not really doable, then you know not to shoot at that distance. If you know that your split time to be accurate at a certain distance is what it is, you should be able to control your shots to the point where you're getting effective shots. Not only because there's potentially innocent bystanders in the background, but because, say it with me, misses don't win gunfights. So we want to get as many shots where we want them as quickly as we can. And shooting that quick is what a normal person would do under the circumstances. But hey, you're getting this mental rep. This is something to consider before it actually happens out in the field.
Yeah, and listen, getting that consideration beforehand, incredibly important. I really do want to commend this officer for his decision making. He's telling people drop the gun. You can see the guy in the green shirt sitting, right kind of at the bottom of that car, right at its wheels, with his hands in the air. Another guy right next to him, hard for us to see until he gets closer, with his hands in the air. And he is having to make discriminations in really brief time, in less than ideal lighting conditions, about who's a threat here and who do I need to stop. There are still shots breaking by the bad guy here, okay? So I just want to commend him for good decision making about who needs to be shot and who doesn't need to be shot, and in a incredibly chaotic situation.
100%. Again, I'm going to stop saying 100%. I say it too much. I know. Don't leave a comment. I think an important thing to understand here for the private citizen who's never done a ride along, never been in law enforcement, I think people assume the police magically know everything about a situation as soon as they arrive, right? If you ever called the police for, fill in the blank, whatever it is, and they show up and they don't do what you expect them to do immediately, you're frustrated because you're like, well, there's the thing, go handle the thing. They may not know what the thing is. And in a situation like this, it is as chaotic as it can possibly be. You've got drunks, you got people arguing on the street, you've got shots being fired, you got a whole bunch of people, any of whom could be perfectly innocent, any of whom could be your bad guy that's potentially going to shoot you next. And you've got to sort through it, and that's really difficult to do. And frequently mistakes are made. In this case, no mistakes were made. I think this officer did a fantastic job. Again, we talked earlier about transitioning from one mundane task to an incredibly critical task. He did that well. And as you said, John, he was able to discern kind of who the good guys and bad guys were, or at least which bad guys had already given up and were no longer a threat.
Yeah, and now, again, he's going to get himself into the fight here. And look at what he sees. I want you to see, we got people on the ground, but he can see, and this is an interesting bit here, that sometimes I think people think, well, gosh, we're looking at it on the badge cam and we should be able to see everything. Well, remember, what the badge cam sees is not what a Mark 1 Mod 0 eyeball sees, right? They're not the same thing at all. And in many cases, especially in lower light like this, the resolution of a badge cam goes down in order to be able to get enough light to film, whereas the human eye can see in much more detail in these lower light conditions. So if he sees it, and what he sees here is he sees a guy with a gun in his hand, and he sees a guy after all these shots are breaking. And so again, who is the bad guy? Usually it's the person shooting somebody, not shooting back at him, right? It's usually the person who is taking innocent life. And so he sees that, he's got to get to work on it. And that's that decision-making process that you got to make right in the moment, Mike.
Yeah, I'll say this about that, John. We watch these badge cams, and you and I do our level best to break them down and just call balls and strikes as best we see it. But seeing it is the issue, right? We had a video not long ago in LA where there was a warehouse, a bad guy had been in a pursuit, he was armed, he ran into a warehouse, and he was approached by officers, and there were some private citizens in there that worked at the warehouse that were witnessing this whole thing. And if you only got one camera angle, if you only got the camera angle of the officer who was doing the shooting, you wouldn't understand why he was pulling the trigger. You'd be like, why is he shooting that guy? It doesn't make any sense. It looks like murder. It looks like an execution. It was only because we had an overhead shot, right, from a security cam looking down at that situation that we could clearly see the suspect and what he was doing, which was manipulating a firearm, which was trying to get it into battery. It turns out it was empty. Nobody knew, whatever. In this case, we're seeing, I mean, if we're lucky, this is a 480p, right? Rendering of this video. It's grainy. Everything looks further away than it does in real life. So he's a lot closer to this than it looks like in the video. We have to take all that stuff into consideration and not make hate. We have to judge, right? We have to keep our police officers accountable, but don't make a hasty judgment based on the first thing that you see. What you couldn't really make out here was the guy was reaching for a gun, so he needed to be shot. Whether or not he was facing the officer or facing away, whether he was kneeling, laying down, hanging from a tree, swinging from, like Spider-Man, doesn't matter. He needed to be shot right then and there, and that's what happened.
Yeah, and again, this guy does end up being a threat. Now, officer here sees it, sends several more rounds, sends them at a very high rate. I will say, it looks to me here as we move forward that he's got a really good reload. Magazine comes out, new magazine goes in, he gets back to work. Officers, you absolutely need to carry at least 3 spares. I would suggest 4 or even 5. And listen, you need to be able to reload your gun quickly, under pressure. You need to have that be an absolute automatic reaction. That said, the reason that he had to reload here is that he missed so much, is that he wasn't able to have the emotional control to fire at the speed of competence. I'm not faulting him for that, but I am saying, officers, hear me, slow your roll a little bit. Make sure that you put sights. Remember, your sights set the pace. Grip is the master, sights set the pace. Trigger is the servant. And so, you put a few hits early, you don't end up having to reload, and that reloading takes you more time than you might have saved shooting quicker.
I'll tell you something right now. This officer whose badge cam we're watching, Nobody in the world will be harder on him than he will be on himself watching this back. Second thing, this reload that looks, I mean, to the average, to the casual observer, looks a little clunky. He doesn't quite get the tip of the mag into the mag well the first try. It takes him half a second, whatever. This is how someone who has practiced their reloads to as extensively as who on the range can do them in an eighth of a second. That's how fast they look in the real world after you've been shooting and you've been in a stressful environment. And this is why we train, so that we will fall to the level of our training, and not try to rise to the level of the occasion. This guy practices reloads 100%. And this is what it looks like when you're shaking and your adrenaline's dumping and your heart's pounding. This is how he can still get it right in the moment under this kind of stress, is because I'm sure he trained the crap out of his reloads. And this is a result. This was a relatively fast reload.
Yeah, and a little harder to do with gloves on than with empty hands too. Now then, he puts some shots in this guy's back, finally gets a hit there. It takes him a couple shots after the reload to get a hit. I want to just mention here, this is how people justifiably get shot in the back. And it is 100% not about where you shoot somebody. It is 100% about why you shoot somebody. So when we articulate, why did you shoot that guy in the back? Because he was facing away from me, but he was using the gun after I'd hollered at him to drop the gun several times to threaten the guy that was in red. And he had already shot at that guy in red several times, and I had to shoot him to stop that. And so, is that a reasonable thing? Yes, you can defend a third party, and absolutely a police officer, we expect them to defend a third party from a deadly threat. So simply, is it justifiable to shoot somebody in the back? Maybe, right? Not all the time you shoot somebody in the back. It's about why, and I think this officer did the right thing.
Hey, you can tell these cops have just the right level of aggression. They're just aggressive enough. I don't want passive cops, right? I want cops who have restraint and aggression at the same time. If you look back a few frames, you'll see another young officer just Carl Lewising it down the block at someone who I assume someone who's fleeing. And that kid's taken off like a jackrabbit because he wants to get the bad guy. And that's how I want my cops to think. I want to get the bad guy. But that restraint is also called for. So we don't want them shooting randomly at random people. These cops showed a ton of aggression and restraint at the same time. They got in there and solved the problem. And as far as I think I talked already about shooting in the back, it's never about where you shoot someone. It is the target that presents itself and the reason that we're shooting that count, and that's it.
Yep, and listen, Mike's new indie band, Restrained Aggression, is opening this week in a couple of different places, so make sure you find him for that. These officers did a really good job. I really think all the way around, man, from the ordinary force that was used early to the deadly force that was used late. A couple little things here about the speed of necessity versus the speed of competence. We can work on that. These guys covered their ass.